Good morning to everyone who is here and who is watching us from afar. I'm Marcia Mode-Stavros, a practitioner here at Light on the Mountains. And for those of you not in the room, I just want to set the scene a little tiny bit. We have one of the three Hunter boys doing the live stream today. For those of you who are locals, those Hunter boys really made an impact on the football team this year. So it is because of Lennon Hunter that you all are able to join us this morning. The other thing that I think is important to note is in the front row center are two of our wise sages and founders, the Reverends Bob and Barbara Grabowski, and we wouldn't be here without them. And they are the epitome of resilience and good health, and we're so grateful. Now let's all go to that not small, quiet place where you call it your own and where you connect with Spirit. I know there is an incredible life force, Father, Mother, Spirit, God, the isness, the allness, the order behind the cosmos. I know this life force to be all-providing, all-sustaining, and all renewing. And I invite each one of us to open to this knowingness, to know that we have a place to turn to go inward to connect with. When the world is troubled, when we are troubled, when we are challenged. We are here as spiritual sojourners, we are here as individuals, but we are also here as a community. And I give grateful thanks for Reverend John, for R.L., for Max, for Lennon, for Julie, for all of the countless volunteers who open this place so that we can come together. And I give thanks to you watching from afar. And together we say, and so it is. I'm going to read you a slightly shortened version of a New York Times article that was published October 22nd. It's called, I Love You, I Am Sorry. One Jew, one Muslim, and a friendship tested by war. The two women sat knee to knee. Aziza Hassan, a devout Muslim, looked out at the group gathered around her, spoke of the loved ones who had died in Israel and Gaza, and began reciting the first chapter of the Quran. In the name of God, the most compassionate and most merciful, show us the straight way, the way of those whose portion is not wrath and who do not go astray. Then the woman beside her, Andrea Hodos, a devout Jew, followed with a Hebrew song acknowledging the angels. On my right side is Gabriel, God's strength, she told the crowd, translating the song. Behind me, God's healer, Raphael. Above my head is God's divine presence. On this late afternoon of October 15, the war between Israel and Hamas was well underway as these two women sat on parched grass at a bustling park 6 miles west of downtown Los Angeles. A circle of Jews and Muslims surrounded them, all part of New Ground, a nonprofit fellowship program that has helped more than 500 Los Angeles Muslims and Jews learn to listen, disagree, empathize with each other, and become friends. Aziza, whose family roots run through Palestine, runs New Ground. Andrea, once a resident of Israel, has been her associate director since 2020. It's never been this bad, they said practically in unison in a recent interview. Never have they worried like this about death and destruction in the Middle East, sparking anti-Semitic and Islamophobic violence in the United States. Never have they fretted like this about their work and their words being misinterpreted and misunderstood. Never had they held this much dread or found this kind of hopeful grounding solace in the interfaith bonds their labor have created. We're so connected, Aziza said, that sometimes Andrea can complete any thought or start a sentence and finish it for me. The two are more than co-workers. Their close friendship signals that the ties that bind adherents of Judaism and Islam can remain strong, even as the war pitting people of their faiths against each other rages. We are like sisters. We are a family. Both women have deep roots in Israel and Palestine. Andrea spent her post-college years living in Jerusalem, reconnecting with her faith. Her husband, now a rabbi and professor of rabbinical literature, lived in Israel for a dozen years, and their children are Israeli citizens. Aziza's paternal grandparents were Palestinian farmers who were forced off their land at gunpoint during the creation of Israel in the late 1940s. As the firstborn daughter of a Muslim father and a white American mother, Aziza spent much of her childhood in Jordan. She recalls the taunts of schoolmates in Jordan, telling her that her mother was going to hell for being a Christian. After her father died and her family moved to a small town in Kansas, she remembers hearing she was going to hell for being a Muslim. Navigating through a world of opposite views is how it has always been for me, she said. The work is gut-wrenching and difficult, but I keep coming back because it is so important to carry on. Her voice trailed. Still, she said, I sometimes wonder why I'm so devoted to something that seems so bleak, especially now. After reports of the massacre and kidnapping of Israeli Jews by Hamas militants, the two exchanged texts. Aziza wrote, "How are you holding up?" before expressing anger that such atrocity could be done in the name of God, and a fear of a violent retaliation that would take innocent lives. I love you. I am sorry. I am here. Andrea was reeling. Her son had a friend who was taken captive. The shock and pain she felt was so profound at first, she struggled to find the right words. So she replied by sending poems about the grief of loss during war. So much gratitude to have your partnership, she wrote. Her heart ached for Israel, but she needed to make it known her care was not limited by borders. I'm so worried about everyone in Gaza for what is ahead. As the war and atrocity spread, both women struggled against depression, nausea, and sleeplessness. They were unable to eat. They pressed on, appearing at mosques and synagogues and gathering friends of their faith in their respective homes. The New Ground gathering at the park west of downtown Los Angeles was such a moment. A solemn, grieving apprehension took hold as the two friends welcomed the group. Israel had spent days bombing targets in Gaza, an act of retribution for Hamas' attack that was causing a humanitarian disaster. For a long while, members of New Ground gathered in small groups of people, both faiths mixing as slivers of anguished conversation filled the air. I know Israelis who are going from funeral to funeral for children of their friends. I know people in Gaza who have lost loved ones. My children are scared, and I don't know what to say. My generation has to make something different for the next. We don't have to repeat the hurt on both sides. And our past, then too. Everyone ended up sitting together in a circle, side by side, knee to knee. Aziza said her prayer, and Andrea sang. The sun went down. The sky turned black. For a while, there was a peaceful silence. And so it is. And now the affirmation for November, which is on the insert near the top in red. If you'll please read it with me, and I always quote Reverend Bob, who was my practitioner teacher, and said, it's not the words, it's the feeling you put behind it. So keep that in mind since he's here to listen. Each and every step I take lands on sacred ground.
Thank you, Marcia. Good morning, everyone. There's a running theme in conversations these days. Had dinner with a lovely person in our valley this Friday night, and we sat and talked about our desire to talk and to listen, and how hard that was these days, that you find yourself at a dinner party with people who disagree with you pretty violently and want to grill you, or people who agree with you and I want to harangue about everyone else. And where's the conversation? Max and I were talking about our responsibility to do our research before we quote someone. beautiful reading. My friend Billy Christopher Maupin, an actor who decided rather farther along in life that he was meant to be a teacher, wrote this. He said, I saw some former students. Now he's only been teaching for a few years, so former meant they graduated a couple of years ago. He was a substitute teacher before that. He started wearing bold ties so that kids would notice. They did. He said, I saw some former students at a concert tonight. One of them introduced me to her friend, and we chatted for a bit. As I was walking away, I overheard her say to her friend, he's iconic. I wrote him back. I said, decades from now, your kids will be talking to their kids, or their grandkids, or to an astronaut on his way to some planet, or to a doctor, or a patient, or the next Sondheim, or the president, or the lady sitting alone on the park bench, speaking to one who's nervous, or scared, or lost, or sad, or hopeful. And they'll say, you know, I had this teacher once, and he said, and they'll be talking about you, and most likely they'll finish with something like this. You know, he really cared. So go on, keep making our world better. We're all grateful. And I think about, from all of these things, are opportunities to take a moment. I want to just take a moment to listen. I want to take a moment to open a door for someone. I still love opening doors for people. You see them coming towards the building and you open the door and hold the door and stand there for an extra, I don't know, 5 seconds, 10 seconds that it takes them to get there. And people look at you oddly. And I sometimes question whether or not they needed someone to hold the door for you. And I said to someone the other day, oh, I didn't really do that for you. I did it for me. I really like it. It's true. I enjoy holding doors open for people. I enjoy conversation, and I think we all do. And I think in our current climate, sometimes we shy away from taking a moment. So this all, of course, is happening as I'm reading John's blog this week. Funny how it all comes together.
Thank you, R.L. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone on the other side of the camera. Thank you, Marcia, for that article. Just before I talk about what I think I'm going to talk about, our theme this month is walking on sacred ground. And when we think of Holy Land right now, or Ukraine, it's beyond us to think that could possibly be walking on holy ground. And to challenge ourselves to utilize prayer in a way that might be different than what you grew up with. I was trained that you figure out what you think the solution be, and then you pray for that. I am beyond knowing what the solution should be. And I'm on. But I'm not. Am I on now? Wait, yes. Okay. So, I'm not going to repeat that. So, in Centered Spiritual Living, when we talk about prayer, we'll often talk about a phrase that may sound different to you that we'll call divine right action and guidance, meaning this is so beyond what I know, but there is a knower within that does, that we are connected to God, the divine, the universe, whatever you want to know, and I'm willing to delegate. I'm willing to just be in a state of knowing that there is a solution that serves all. And that's all that I'm going to pray for. I mean, I can't control this. I know there's tragedy on all aspects, and there are victims on all sides, and that all that we can do is hold in prayer for divine right action and guidance and just be in that space. And when you pray in that manner, notice your reaction is different than being in the drama of you just saw this on the news and this on the news, and you're trying to come up with a solution and quote unquote pray for that. Try not to go there. There's a space that you can go of centeredness just to trust and give your energy and prayer to the highest solution that's available. I think that's all that we can do. So let's switch gears to what I really was going to talk about today. And it is about talking about walking on sacred ground. And maybe different ways. How do we contact that within us when your life may not seem like it's sacred ground? And to ask yourself, where am I and how did I get here? So in the School of Ministry, for Central Spiritual Living has a School of Ministry, and I attended from 1997 to 2000. And during that time, they did something that was really cutting edge. They had remote classes. I know, but they didn't have the technology for it. 20 of the classes that we took at that time were remote classes, and the instructors recorded the classes on cassette tapes. And for years, I still had these big sleeves of cassette tapes in my, because they were good classes and they were timeless, until I realized I have no place to play these things, and I had to let go of them. But what was great about this is that the School of Ministry was able to draw beyond their faculty, and there were people that were actually internationally known in their subjects that they were able to contract with. And it was really kind of amazing to have this exposure. And there was this woman, I hate to say it like that, but I don't remember her name, and I don't have her cassette tapes anymore. So this woman was teaching her remote class on time management, knowing that everyone has difficulty with this, and certainly in ministry, you're pulled at so many directions at different times that it's really easily to emotionally melt down. So the whole point was this, to teach yourself how to look at this, and she was a consultant for many large companies through corporations throughout the United States, and she ran her little business of consulting from home. But I learned a lesson from her that was unintentional on her part. Not that I would judge, but it seemed like her life wasn't as balanced as she was teaching us it should be. And I remember on this one tape, she's saying that you need to schedule your rejuvenation time, and we do. And that's going to be the core of what I'm talking about today. And she was so structured. And she says, I'm going to tell you a story about my life, and don't do this. She says, I scheduled from 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 2:15 that I was going to sit at my dining room table with a can of soda and drink it and get away from my work. And she somehow got a call, went long, and she missed it. And she was like beating herself up for it. And so here was my takeaway. Is your life that crowded that you have to schedule a soda? No, I mean, really. Is it that to that point, or even a glass of water? I'm scheduling a glass of water at 2 p.m. today. The other thing was, she didn't replace that personal time. The ship had sailed. No soda for the day. And I thought, again, this lovely creature was advising CEOs of major corporations, basically, if you miss soda time, it's done. And so I think that helped me start to set up my own theory of balance and how to deal with imbalance in my life and with ministry, and to hopefully never get to the point that I had to schedule a soda or a glass of water. But the reason why I bring this up is that some of us watched a really amazing movie together this week as a community. Sabbath, how many were there? I know we had a few people there. And we co-sponsored that showing with the LDS Church in Haley, with the Wood River Jewish community, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Haley. And we had small group discussions afterwards for about 15 minutes just to share, and they were really great. And the movie is available to see free online. People at home, I put the link. It's a YouTube, and here you don't have to write down the link. Just go to YouTube, look up Sabbath, the movie. It's there, it's free. But here's the power of this movie. On one hand, it talks about the spiritual practice of the Sabbath, created through the Jewish people, and how many of them approach that. But the larger subject is self-care, spiritual, emotional, and physical, that many of us seem to be lacking. And I think as many of us watch this movie, and this is the second time I watched it, and first just the presentation of how, I guess, observant Jews approach the Sabbath. And again, I've had many friends over the years that are Jewish, and they all have approached it differently. But I think many people with whom I spoke with, not only that night but before, that have seen it, watching how the Sabbath is traditionally approached, looked at it with great longing. So I was raised Catholic, but there wasn't this practice of Sabbath. And let me tell you how it was presented. And you may know or may not know about how the Sabbath is. So if you have a more traditional observance, Sabbath is from sundown on Friday until sundown on Saturday. It's non-negotiable. It's not like, let's go to a movie and then we'll do Sabbath. It's like, no, it's not negotiable. And it is a 24-hour period of time where you put your life of how you live it 6 days a week aside, and you give yourself and your families permission to be present with each other, to do spiritual practice. And for those that were there, notice that different people who were Jewish talking about this, how they start the Sabbath symbolically through the lighting of candles, and how somehow just in that lighting of the candles, that simple ritual, you were given permission to enter a different state of consciousness. There was no, let me just check my emails. There was no everyone around the dinner table looking at their phones. It was you step into a different state of consciousness and a different world entirely, where you had permission to, if nothing else, to rest. Doesn't that sound great? No, really. Think of that. A non-negotiable, 24 hours a day, once a week, where self-care was not negotiable. And you can fill it up any way you want. It may be in a religious, spiritual sense or a completely secular sense. But again, imagine that it's not negotiable. Yes, emergencies. Someone got run over by a car. Yes, you're going to the hospital. But in light of nothing else like that happening, it's not like, gee, we'll postpone it this week, or someone invited us to a wedding. There's none of that. It's not negotiable. And people in the documentary, as well as I talked to someone afterwards who is not Jewish, but they have a Sabbath practice. They're part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and that's part of what they do. And they do it on a Friday sundown to Saturday sundown as well. That's their holy day. And the man I was talking to is a contractor, and he said the same thing. It is this sense of relief when sundown comes and my 24 hours of rest is non-negotiable. And he says, I tell the guys at the job site, yes, if it's on fire, call me. But barring that, they know not to call. So think about that a bit. Just think about that a bit. I'm not suggesting that that is something or a way to approach it for all of us, but imagine if you could sincerely have a consciousness of Sabbath in your life in some way, shape, or form, where self-care was not negotiable. Really think about that. Because notice things that you may put on your calendar. You say, I'm finally going to do this great thing for me, and that's the first thing that gets taken off the calendar. It's not only written in pencil, it's written in an erasure. It's just like, oh yeah, if nothing else happens, I'll do this great thing, and it's the first thing that goes out the window. So let's talk about how we can do this, in a sense, get over our hesitation, get over our, even fear or reluctance, and get over, I hate to say this, the lack of self-worth to say that I'm not worth self-care.
That's really what it gets down to. Because again, that's the first thing that always comes off the calendar, isn't it? Gee, I really wanted to go and have that whatever, and my boss called, or there was 20 emails, and before you know it, whatever. It does start with a daily spiritual practice. That again that phrase, spiritual practice, makes people shake in their boots. Oh my God, what do you mean? And if you're raised like me, and I've mentioned this before, I was raised with prayer as punishment. Go over there and pray for 10 minutes because it's like, gee, that makes me want to develop a daily spiritual practice. For going to Catholic school, the first hour of every morning, Monday through Friday, was catechism. That was fun. Nothing, I'm sorry, Catholics that are maybe here or at home, but in the 60s, catechism was not fun. I'm sure it is amazingly fun today. But it was not in the 60s. It really was not. And so it was like, God, thank God it's over with, kind of thing. And again, I really don't want it to sound the way that it's sounding, but we're kind of raised that anything that is structure-wise around spirituality is suspect, not fun, something you can't wait till it's over. No, really, check with yourself. And so when you have been in classes with me, particularly our foundation class, which is the first one, and it should be on our calendar online for the spring, sometime within the next week or so, we talk about spiritual practice. And there's this reluctance, this dread. How could I ever do it? It's like, gee, next thing is going to ask me to take 2 tablespoons of cod liver oil every day. I mean, it is just this, oh my God, how are we going to do this? What is spiritual practice? It is being present where you are without any agenda. Yes, you can do prayers, you can do chanting, you can throw salt over your I don't care, whatever you want to do with it. It is actually just being present right where you are, not in the past of regret of what may have happened in the past, and not on your day timer in the future of what's coming up. It is just being present. And we do this naturally. You do spiritual practice in spite of yourself, and you don't even know it. I've often said the spiritual practice many of us all do is walk our dogs. It is true. If you walk your dog, especially alone, you get into a rhythm of something else, and you are completely just present with that. Have you noticed? Sometimes riding your bike, going to the gym, anything that you kind of go into a slightly different stage of consciousness in spite of yourself, you just do. And what happens when you're doing that? Isn't it kind of amazing how you may have been thinking about what do I do about this issue or whatever, and something pops in your brain. The next indicated step pops into your brain from where? It comes from that fact that you put down this barrier to everything that you were connected to in spirit and the universe, and something was actually given a couple seconds to come in. People say, aren't my prayers answered? Why didn't you be quiet long enough to listen? That's really what it is. We want like a spreadsheet to come through on email. This is what I want to do. It is being present, being quiet enough, and again, don't mess yourself up with, I'm supposed to be quiet, and then everything floods in. And often I talk about, with my new classes, what I call the bathrobe meditation. Just sit in your bathroom, look out the window, have a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, no agenda, don't check email, put your phone in the other room. Do it for 10 minutes. You'll love it, I promise. You do it already. It's like, oops, I meditated. Oh my God, alert the media. So you just do it more consciously, and once you think, actually that's kind of nice. So we get away from that judgment of what it is, and again, it is just being present where you are, and actually being mindful and looking at your life in a consciousness of Sabbath to allow that to be something that happens more often than not. So did anyone read the Stephen Covey materials in the 1990s? Was 2 big books that I read at that time. One, 7 Habits of Successful People, and the other was First Things First. Anyone read First Things First? It is all about the Sabbath. So it's interesting. So in the mid-90s, when these books were like the hot thing, I was an outside salesperson. And the company was owned by a male-female married couple, and they couldn't be any different in their approach to work. So at that time, again, there really wasn't email so much happening yet, but we would, as salespeople, get these mass phone messages from the guy saying, you know, we're all driving around, going to our accounts. Don't let the other salespeople eat your lunch. Get out there, go do it. You know, if you don't do it, they'll do it. It's like this constant sense of lack. His wife, on the other hand, was accredited by the Covey Institute to teach workshops about First Things First. So it was just like 2 different things. And actually, she gave us a couple workshops, and one was this First Things First. So the whole, as I remember, you were advised to intentionally form your calendar a week or 2 ahead of time. And every week, at the very least, check in with your calendar for 15, 20 minutes. It's like, don't get up on Monday and you suddenly realize there's an important client at 9 o'clock. I mean, you kind of want to know what's coming up. And there was different categories of things, and I don't even remember what they were. And at that time, you could buy day timers that were geared around these different categories to help you to do it. And I think they now have online versions. I haven't checked. They used to have some online versions. But here was one of the rules. There was this one category called sharpening the saw. Does that sound familiar? Meaning Sabbath type of activities. And we were advised that that's what you put on your calendar first, as opposed to what we usually do. I have a sharpening the saw activity, and if there happens to be any time left, I'll squeeze it in there, and then I'll have a soda if there's time. But his thing was, no, you put that in first. It's somewhat non-negotiable. I mean, you can trade time. It's like, gee, my 11 o'clock appointment canceled. They want to go to this time where my saw time is. So yeah, trade them. Do that. That's allowable. But you just say, don't need to sharpen the saw this week. It's not negotiable. And the biggest blockage in that is ourselves. We have been taught not to respect self-care. That somehow working a godzillion hours a week is the thing to do. In fact, I just heard some CEO kind of person on somewhere, like TikTok or online, and talking about young adults just kind of coming out of college or job training. He says, yeah, they just need to work 80 hours a week for 10 years to really get on their feet. And they're saying, no, I don't think we need to do that. Not to say that you don't really give it that extra bit as you're doing something new, but somehow training someone who's 20 years old to work 70 hours, 80 hours a week, I just don't think is a thing. Who would want to do that? Not to say you just don't dedicate different parts of your life. So part of it is to make room inside that this is how you would like to experience your life. And that is not negotiable, that we need to sharpen our saws. And an example I gave in my blog this week, could you imagine buying a car and never servicing it or changing the oil? Really? Could you just say, now, wrote that check, making a car loan, never have to get an oil change ever again? Could you imagine doing that? You would never do that. Well, maybe you would. In fact, I had a friend when I was early 20s. His car blew up on the Ventura Freeway, as a matter of fact. And he says, well, I've had an oil leak and I haven't put oil in it in 6 months. The car was unrecoverable. But we do that with ourselves. Like, I'm feeling like I'm missing my gears or something. But that's okay. I'll just strong arm through here. I'll make it through here. But what we don't realize is that when we reach that point, we are no good to anyone, even ourselves. And we delude ourselves. We think we are still effective when everyone is actually avoiding us. because we're not effective. And we're grumpy, or what I call crispy. Like no good to anyone. And as I tell people in class, your spiritual practice is your best time management tool you will ever utilize in your life. To reassess and realize that if you don't have that sense of Sabbath within you, whatever level that you're doing it, your life just isn't going to work. So here's my challenge for you this week. Don't you hate when I give homework? So I think it was Covey would say on Sunday nights is when to schedule 15 minutes just to look at your calendar for the next week and do the saw time and all that sort of thing. So do that today. Schedule one sharpening the saw appointment with yourself. Do it not saying, if I have enough time, if that client cancels, if the stars align in the age of Aquarius, I will do it. It's not on a wish board kind of thing. It's a thing that you are committed to doing. And again, a catastrophe happens in your family, of course, you're going to attend that. So that's the first step of the homework. And this is what's going to happen. Something's going to happen that's going to tempt you to cancel that appointment with yourself. Oh, that client I've been wanting to see forever, he can only come in that time. Notice your discomfort in that moment. The client or self-care. And again, you can trade time. You can have the soda at 3 instead of at 2. But just notice how conflicted you are in that moment. I've been trying to get that appointment for 3 years. And it just happens to be at my saw time. Again, you can move it around, but you just can't get rid of it. But come in the state of consciousness that it is non-negotiable. It is something on the level of a Sabbath way of living that it is just important as, quote unquote, the client or whatever it is that you're doing. In fact, in the Sabbath movie, they talked about there is this fear of why I am down for 25 hours, my, quote unquote, competitors are out there, like sharks after my clients sort of thing. But they're not resting, and you are. So think about that today. What appointment can you set with yourself this week? And here's even for extra points. I'm so busy this week, I can't start till next week. Do it anyway. You need a soda. No, really. That's how it works. We set ourselves up for failure in a sense. I could never do this. It could never happen. Do it anyway. Make it like how your Jewish friends approach Sabbath, that they have a Sabbath spiritual practice, that you light the candle and you're in. And then notice if you are able to completely give yourself over to that experience. And let's say, I get to make up the rules here. It is a minimum of 1 hour. It can be longer. We're not doing the 15-minute soda plan here. It's got to be an hour. And I challenge you to do it at a time that you always tell yourself that self-care is impossible. The plot thickens, doesn't it? See how it feels. It'll feel good, and you will feel guilty at the same time. You will. And then schedule another one. And you'll start to think, after you do that a few times, that's sharpening the saw time. There's something in this. This just might be the way to go. People don't think I'm so grumpy anymore. So that's my challenge with you. Because, getting back to our theme, we are always walking on sacred ground, but sometimes we're too busy to notice. So let's just take this in for a moment. And first and foremost, let's know that divine right action and guidance is within what appears to be conflicts within our world, within the Middle East, within the Ukraine, wherever else there is scourges, wherever else there is disagreements, that we put aside our opinions of how it should turn out, and we just know that we are walking on sacred ground, and the divine God, the universe, is right there. And we recognize that that presence is there, and we give ourselves over to it. And as that is true for different, what appears to be conflicts in the world, it is true for us in our own lives. We are always walking on sacred ground. We affirm that we are now dedicated to ourselves to a consciousness of Sabbath, which means we see the divine in all things and we make time to do that. So we sharpen the saw. We do it without guilt. We do it with great joy and pleasure, knowing that as we fill ourselves up, we have even more to share. So we give thanks for this. And as we give thanks for this, we release it, we let it go. As we release it into what we call the creative medium, into the universe, into the heart and mind of spirit, as we truly let it go, it comes back to us in perfection. And so it is.